40th anniversary benefit series, Pièces de Résistance. Sorry if I've mangled that, because it is so inspiring to hear Alaska Quarterly Review contributors read their work and chat a bit, and also to have this archive of fantastic readings and events that you can watch at any time. You can find recordings of previous programs at our website, aqreview.org, and on our YouTube channel. Today we have two outstanding writers, Weike Wang and Cara Blue Adams, that I feel fortunate to share the next hour with. So welcome. I'm Heather Lindy, and on behalf of the Center for Narrative and Lyric Arts and our hosts, the Anchorage Museum at the Rasmussen Center, thank you for being here today. Gunashchish, as we say here where I am, on the banks of the Chilkat River in Haines, Alaska, the homelands of the Tlingit, Chilkat-Quan, and Chilkoot-Quan, caretakers of this place since time immemorial. While this reading is free, AQR, like all literary journals, could use your help to publish more writers like the ones you're going to hear from today. So please consider a donation. And now I'd like to introduce Ronald Spatz, who is the co-founder and editor-in-chief of Alaska Quarterly Review. He's a professor of English at the University of Alaska, a former National Endowment for the Arts Fellow, and the recipient of 2 Alaska Governor's Awards and a Contribution to Literacy Award from the Alaska Center for the Book. Under Ron's 40 plus years of leadership and vision, Alaska Quarterly Review has created strong connections, as this series demonstrates, between Alaska and the larger literary community in the US and the world, and been influential in supporting new and emerging writers, as well as presenting works that include a rigorous questioning of larger societal issues. Ron? Ron, you there?
We lost Ron for a second. He's back now with the video off. Hopefully we'll hear from him shortly.
Okay.
It's windy in Anchorage, so maybe we blew the internet out or something.
Hopefully he'll be here. This happens. It's nice to know we're live, actually, right?
Heather, your internet is actually kind of amazing, given that you told me there's like 5-foot waves outside of.
Yes, I know. I figured it would be me that would cut off. For those of you that don't know, Haines is I'm in a rural community in Southeast Alaska in that panhandle, surrounded by mountains on a fjord, and it's stormy today and really feels like fall here. So that's what's happening down where I live. And we do have really strong internet, and lots of Alaska does, especially rural Alaska.
Is it because of you just have good satellite signal? Because it's
some, but it's also, I think, in some ways, because Alaska, some places in Alaska went kind of right from having like no telephone and service to having everything.
Yeah.
So in Haines, where I am, we used to have, we still do have like listener personals on the radio station. You leave messages for people that don't have phones or lived out of the phone lines, but now, cell phones came and internet and computer. So hopefully Ron is back.
That makes sense, because it's you probably just get a more modern system immediately.
Yeah, in some places. There are still plenty of places that are very much behind, and like large, Alaska's like a country, and especially the poorer rural communities have been struggling with getting broadband and the kind of service that our area here in Southeast is pretty good. Further north, that's a continuing and ongoing issue, and it is still here too, to some extent.
It seems like such a beautiful place. I've always wanted to go in person.
Yeah.
Well, come on up. I think that Cody is trying to get Ron back in, because Ron likes to do a little introduction and a land acknowledgement, and so see where he is. And I guess in the meantime, maybe you just tell us where you two are, since we just talked about where I am.
Sure. Yeah, I'm in New York, so I'm by the Columbia campus because I sometimes teach there. I lived in Boston for a really long time for all of my 20s for school and stuff like that. So mostly been like a Northeast person. But likewise, I really want to go to Alaska. It just seems far now, but it also seems wonderful, and you get away from kind of like the city life a little bit.
So there's some really stellar writers conferences in Alaska. There's one in Ketchikan in Homer. There's another one in Skagway near me northwards. There's some nice writers retreats. Again, there's a Story Knife is in Homer. It's a women's retreat. And it's fabulous and brand new. And there's also Alderworks is a retreat, sort of log cabin style in Skagway. And I'm sure there's probably other ones, but those are places that I'm sure would love to have either of you. And Ron's back.
Hey, sorry about that. What a time for the computer to crash, but makes it more dramatic. So I'm really, really excited that we're going to begin this year with these great writers and our new series for Alaska Quarterly Review. So grateful that we are able to begin. So thank you, Heather. Thank you for being patient, everybody who's online. Welcome. This event is being recorded and will be available on the Alaska Quarterly YouTube channel. Before we begin, I need to make a few acknowledgements. Alaska Quarterly Review gratefully acknowledges the Anchorage Museum for hosting and providing technical support for this event. And the blip out was not because of the museum. Okay, and we want to thank the Center for the Narrative and Lyric Arts, our 501c3 umbrella organization, which makes everything we do possible. I also want to thank our friends at the Alaska Center for the Book for including this event in their celebration, and the 49 writers for providing information about this series within their organization. Finally, and very important, I want to make a land acknowledgement. Alaska Quarterly Review recognizes the indigenous lands on which all Alaskans live. AQR is located in Anchorage, and Anchorage is Dena'ina homeland. Dena'ina is the language spoken by the traditional, present, and future caretakers of this land. Land acknowledgement opens a space with gratefulness and respect for the contributions, innovations, and contemporary perspective of Indigenous peoples, and marks our collective movement toward decolonization and equity. And now to begin, Heather Lindy will introduce today's feature wonderful fiction writers, Weike Wang and Cara Blue Adams. Heather was recently selected as Alaska's State Writer Laureate. Her term runs from this year to 2023. She is the author of 4 books of nonfiction, all published by Algonquin. If you lived here, I'd know your name. Take Good Care of the Garden and the Dogs. Find the Good, which was chosen last year as the Alaska Reads book. And her most recently published book is Of Bears and Ballads. So now on to Heather and their introductions.
Oh, it is really my pleasure to introduce Weike Wang and Cara Blue Adams. Weike is the author of the 2017 best-selling novel Chemistry, a Washington Post notable book, one of the best books of the year at NPR, Entertainment Weekly, and Ann Patchett's list on the PBS NewsHour, and Oprah is a fan. She also won the 2018 Pen Hemingway, a Whiting Award, and is a National Book Foundation 5 Under 35 honoree. Her stories and essays have appeared here in Alaska Quarterly Review, Ploughshares, and The New Yorker, among many other publications. She is in the 2019 Best American Short Stories and the O. Henry Prizes. A chemistry major at Harvard, Weike was in pre-med and began reconsidering careers while finishing her doctorate in public health there. So at the same time, attended Boston University and received her MFA. Weike lives in New York City and teaches at the University of Pennsylvania. Her much anticipated second novel, Joan Is Okay, is forthcoming from Random House in January. Weike was born in Nanjing, China, lived in Australia, Canada, and settled in the United States with her family when she was 11. Weike Wang, who says that as a fiction writer, her science background is almost like being bilingual, and that the intersection of science and art interests her a lot and helps her to create characters who are, quote, able to think empirically, but also artistically, creatively, and logically. Plus, she can be very funny and is totally original. As novelist Emily Gould notes, Weike Wang's voice is indelible, hypnotic, mesmerizing, and strange in the best possible way. Cara Blue Adams is the author of You Never Get It Back, a short story collection that's due out in December, and winner of the John Simmons Short Fiction Award that was sponsored by the University of Iowa Press, one of the most prestigious literary prizes in America. Judge Brandon Taylor compared Cara to Alice Munro and says she has, quote, written a modern classic of a collection. It is fearless in its consideration of contemporary life. These stories left me breathless, unquote. Originally from Vermont, Cara lives in Boston, Tucson, has lived in Boston, Tucson, Montreal, Maine, South Carolina, and in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where she co-edited the Southern Review. Cara earned a BA in English Language and Literature from Smith College and an MFA from the University of Arizona. Her fiction also appears in many magazines and journals, including Granta, The Sun, Alaska Quarterly Review, the Kenyon Review in American Short Fiction, and has been awarded the Kenyon Review Short Fiction Prize and many other prizes. She's an associate professor at Seton Hall University and lives in Brooklyn. When editing the Southern Review, Cara learned that the best work she read, quote, carries a sentence level DNA, and that you can see in a couple of sentences what the central tension will be and what the writer's perspective on the world is. The same can be said of her stories and also of Weike Wang's. And Weike is going to start us off today, and she'll read, pass it on to Cara, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end of the hour for them to talk about whatever they want, really, and we'll listen in. So without any further ado, thank you, Weike and Cara, and Weike, take it, it's your turn.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful bio. I need to steal that from you. So this is the beginning of my second novel, Joan Is Okay. I think this is actually the first time I'm reading it out loud because the book comes out in January. So the context is that it's about Joan. She's in the title, and Joan is an ICU doctor. But since I'm starting at the beginning, I don't think you need more context than that. And I'll try to read just a little bit under 20 minutes so we can get Cara to read, and then we can maybe answer some questions or talk about our approaches to fiction. So I'll start. Joan Is Okay. When I think about people, I think about space, how much space a person takes up and how much use that person provides. I am just under 5 feet tall and just under 100 pounds. Briefly, I thought I would exceed 5 feet, and while that would have been fine, I also didn't need the extra height. To stay just under something gives me a sense of comfort, as when it rains and I can open an umbrella over my head. Today, someone said that I look like a mouse, 5'6" and 290 pounds. He, in a backless gown with non-slip tube socks, said that my looking like a mouse made him wary. He asked how old I was, what schools I'd gone to, and were they prestigious. Then where were my degrees from these prestigious schools? My degrees are framed and large, I said. I don't carry them around. While not a mouse, I do have prosaic features, my eyes hooded and lashless. I have very thin eyebrows. I told the man that he could try another hospital or come back at another time, but high chance that I would still be here and he would still think that I look like a mouse. I read somewhere that empathy is repeating the last 3 words of a sentence and nodding your head. My 20s were spent in school, and a girl in her 20s is said to be in her prime. After that decade, all is lost. They must mean looks, because what could a female brain be worth and how long could one last? Being in school often felt like a race. I was told to grab time. And if I didn't, that is, reach out the window and pull time in like a messenger dove, someone else in another car would. The road was full of cars, limousines, and Priuses, but there were a limited number of doves. With this image in mind, I can no longer ride in a vehicle with the windows down. Inevitably, I will look for the dove and offer my hand out to be cut off. My father's stroke was fatal, having followed the natural course of a stroke of that magnitude to its predictable end. Usually, people die from complications, and I was grateful he hadn't. Complications would have angered him, actually, to have died not from a single blow, but from a total system shutdown, which was slower, more painful, and revealed just how vulnerable a person could be. Months prior, he had complained of headaches and eye pressure. I told him to get some tests done, and he said he would, which meant he wouldn't. In China, my father ran a construction company that in the last decade had finally seen success. He was a typical workaholic, and most of my childhood, adolescence, adulthood, not often around. When I got the news, I was in my office at the hotel. When I got the news, I was in my office at the hospital at work. My father had tripped over a bundle of projector cords during a meeting and bounced his head off a chair. As my mother was explaining, either the fall triggered the stroke or the stroke triggered the fall, I asked her to put the phone next to his ear. He was already unconscious, but hearing is the last sense to go. Given the time difference on my side, only morning in Manhattan since I was 12 hours behind, my father was still en route to the meeting that, by my mother's accounts, was meant to be ordinary. I asked my father how his drive was going and if he could, just for today, take a few hours off. He obviously didn't reply, but I said either way this went, I was proud of him. He had never planned to retire and remained until the very end doing what he loved. Twang, I said into the phone and raised my fist into the air. After my mother hung up, I sat there for a while, not facing the computer, and that was my mistake. Having seen my fist go up, the two other doctors in the office asked whom I'd been talking to and what was that strange sound I just made. I said my father, and that the sound was closer to a word, but the word meant nothing. My colleagues didn't know I spoke Chinese, and I wanted to keep it that way to avoid any confusion. But the word did mean something. It had many different definitions, one of which was to begin. It was late September, and my female colleague, Madeline, was teasing my male colleague, Reese, about summer, which was his favorite season, so he was sad to see it go. Only little girls like summers, Madeline said to Reese, little girls in flower crowns and paisley dresses. Reese was a 6'2", 190-pound, all-American guy who went on casual dates with lots of women, but flirted with only Madeline at work. I'm madly in love with you, he would say to her in front of other colleagues like me, and Madeline would either ignore him completely or relentlessly try to get him back. Madeline was a 5'7", 139-pound, robust German woman with a slight accent. She has had the same software engineer boyfriend for 7 years, and they lived in an apartment with lots of plants. What's wrong? Madeline asked, sensing that I had been turned away from my monitor for too long. I asked if one of them could cover my weekend shift. I apologized for the short notice, but I had to leave. Both were happy to do it and even commended my request, since, like my father, I was a workaholic and known to never take time off. They asked where I was going, and I said China, but just for the weekend. Then I turned from them and started packing up my things. Fine, don't tell us, said Reese. I know what it is, Madeline said with a mischievous glint. You're off to get married. You're going to elope. Elope is a funny word, and in hospital speak for patients meant to leave the building at the risk of yourself and without a doctor's consent. After I mentioned my father's passing, Madeline gasped, covering her mouth and for a second shutting her eyes. Through her fingers, she asked if that had been my last conversation with him, and the sound I made, was it then a sound of grief? I said no, not really, and left it at that. Reese and Madeline asked me a few more questions, like when I last saw him, and how long has it been since I left China? You were born there, no? Reese asked, and I said I was born in the Bay Area. California, Madeline said, a great place to be born. But Oakland, I said, to not seem like I was giving my birthplace too much credit. Right, Reese said. Still, Madeline said. I told them that the last time I saw my father was in spring. He had been in New York for business, a possible opportunity here, a new client, and on his way back to JFK, drove past the hospital and met me in its first floor atrium that had fake greenery and a small cafe. He bought me a cup of coffee, and I was almost done with it when he had to leave and catch his flight. But to China, I rarely went, nor did I consider myself too Chinese. The moment those words left my mouth, I wondered why I had said them, what was wrong with being too Chinese, yet it always seemed that something was. I felt a draft, but that was impossible. Our shared office was a windowless room with a dozen desks lined up against the walls and a refreshment stand in the back. The door opened to a hall that had no open windows, and was used only to transport equipment. A folded up wheelchair, an empty bed, pushed by hunched over techs. Madeline asked if I wanted some gum, and it seemed we all did, so we passed the gum packet around and discussed the fresh minty flavor. She asked if I wanted the rest of the pack. International flights were long. How long exactly? I said 16 hours, to which Reese replied, shit. I was surprised that neither asked where in China I was going. The country was huge, and much of it rural. Google Maps didn't work there, and there were only 2 cities most people knew about, and I was going not to the capital, but the other one by the sea. I met my only brother at JFK that night. 8 years older, he was in what he called the new and fit middle age. It didn't matter to him what age I was, 36. I was younger, would always be, and he liked to tell me what to do. Fang was rich now, his Connecticut house massive. Since he had arranged the travel, we boarded first class, where I had a small room by myself, my seat the size of a one-person L-shaped sectional, with a divider to my left that pulled open and closed. For the hour before takeoff, my brother visited me in my room to talk about how great first-class amenities were. The meals and service, different options of heated blankets, ability to recline and lie down, the Le Octane bathroom kit, blue pajamas with red piping, things our father never had nor could appreciate. Because he grew up in a village, I said. It wasn't a village, Fang said. A small town in the countryside, yes, but not a village. Don't talk about things you don't understand. Then Fang explained the Le Octane kit. He opened his bag and held each item out between his 2 index fingers. This was a mini tube of toothpaste. This was a retractable comb, earplugs, moisturizers, and cologne, tiny, powerful mints. He promised that once I flew first class, I could never be the same. There was no other way to travel. When the meals came, we ate them in our respective rooms with silverware and drank our glass flutes of Veuve Clicquot. From across the aisle, Fang asked when I would be getting promoted at work, and I said I was already an attending / the most senior person in the room. Sure, he said, but it can't hurt to ask. There's got to be one position higher. I said probably. He replied most definitely. Then we finished the champagne and gave back our meal trays and prepared for sleep. But for the entirety of the flight, I didn't sleep. I didn't use the Le Octane kit or my blue pajamas. By accident, I pushed the call button, and soon a pretty Asian flight attendant came by to ask if I needed fresh towels for my face or help with my recline. Her teeth were very white, and she said that a total recline was what these chairs were built to do, to go flat like a twin-size bed and provide passengers maximum support. Unbelievable to me that she could smile and talk at the same time, a task I once thought humanly impossible. When I didn't have a request for her, the pretty attendant reclined my sectional, pulled close my room divider again, and dimmed the lights. Waiting for us at Pudong Airport was our mother, with newly permed hair, a colorful crossbody purse, and ankles that shimmered from her translucent silk socks. My mother liked to break my name into 2 syllables. Jonah, she said, and assessed my shoulder. During residency, I'd lost the weight of a forearm. I had since gained it back, but my mother still liked to check and to ask if I was eating enough, if I had already eaten, if I could eat any more. Greetings between some families can be so anticlimactic. My mother and I spoke often enough through phone calls and texts, but after 2 years physically apart, there were no big embraces or kisses. She didn't greet Fang as he was already at baggage claim ahead of the crowd. I had forgotten about crowds in China, that being in a crowd here was like being lost at sea. And for airports, train stations, for any transportation hub, any city really, for all the tourist sites, all the shopping centers, especially around the holidays, especially food markets, escalators, the phrase "Zonghai" exists, or people see. By now, Fang was 20 feet ahead of us at a sleek black booth, calling us a private sedan. In the sedan, he gave the suited up driver with white gloves no directions. He said just the name of the hotel, and the driver was off. I was checked in with a simple handshake, hotel amenities, a 3-inch binder. 100 people came to my father's funeral. Most I didn't know. He had 2 brothers and many friends. My mother has a brother, 2 sisters, and more friends. These aunts and uncles I'd spent less than a week with in total for the entirety of my life. 18 years ago, my parents moved back to Shanghai, and I've lived there ever since. Once I was bound for college, they saw their jobs as parents complete. Fang was already established then, and I was on my way. None of their siblings had immigrated, and my parents were still not as comfortable in America as they'd hoped. So after they left, it was just me and my brother in the States, the rest of our immediate family abroad. At the funeral, I couldn't talk about my father in a significant way, and once I got a few words out, others just wanted me to stop. Afterward, a smaller group of us gathered for dinner at an upscale restaurant in a private room. The room had a round banquet table with a lazy Susan wheel built in. Customary in this country for families to sit for hours-long meals and turn this wheel back and forth, politely forcing everyone to eat. Once one meal ended, another began. Elaborate dishes were brought out, at least 10 varieties of soup. Children would run around the table, laugh hysterically, and hide behind the upholstered chairs. But there were no children at this dinner, and I wondered why. To the woman next to me, I asked where so-and-so was. She pointed to herself. She was this former so-and-so, my father's youngest brother's second child, now my cousin of 22. Oh, I said. Hasn't China changed, my cousin asked? In the last 10 years, it's become brand new. I said I didn't know the country too well. She said that given how my face was Chinese, it was a shame to know nothing about myself. We pushed the lazy Susan clockwise and then counterclockwise. About our country, continued my cousin, it used to be poor, but now we have caught up. We have surpassed most Western countries, even yours. She showed me her fancy leather wallet and told me the price. She passed me her new phone, which she noted was even more advanced than mine. So palpable to me what she was trying to prove, everything was a raise. I told my cousin that I was sorry for her loss. My father was a good uncle to you and a good comrade overall. To resume work on Monday, I had to fly back the next day. Neither Fang nor my mother suggested otherwise, as they both knew my job had come to define me, and in China there was not much for me to do. My aunts had already helped my mother clean out the apartment. Other family and friends regularly brought over food. My brother was also staying another 2 weeks to settle the rest of my father's accounts. Fang had stronger ties to China than I did and knew more people at the funeral. Born in Shanghai, he was raised by my parents until age 6, and then by my mother's side, her own parents and siblings after she and my father left for America. Common of many families at the time that only the parents went first, and the phrase "it takes a village" has never sounded hyperbolic to me, but the truth. Plan was to send for him sooner, but by accident I was born, and a few more years had to pass. From Oakland, my family and I moved to Kansas, then one grandparent died, swiftly followed by another. There was a day in Wichita when I didn't know I had a sibling, and within 24 hours, an older brother appeared. To curious neighbors, he was simply a relative of China, visiting for a little while. Odd and obvious, a 12-year-old boy who looked so much like my mother and half like me. At Pudong, I went to the ticket counter to trade my first class ticket in for coach. The airline clerk squinted and asked if this was really what I wanted to do. Once I switched to economy, I wouldn't be able to switch back. The seats in economy didn't recline into beds. I would be without Les Octane kits and Veuve Clicquot champagne. No more pretty flight attendant with white teeth. Economy isn't a good time, she said in English. And if I was doing this to experience poverty or connect with the masses, it wasn't a well-conceived idea. Clearly, she thought I was insane. While holding my blue US passport, she told her colleague beside her in Shanghainese that I probably had a disease. The colloquialism she used can be said in jest, can be well-meaning or serious. It means something is not right about this person, that literally she has mismanaged one or two of her nerves. The flight back was shorter, 14 hours with the tailwind. In coach, I slept most of the way and woke up to find that I had missed both meal services included with the prize. My father hated waste, so I asked the average-looking flight attendant with yellow teeth if I could have a snack. You see, my father, I said to her, he would have been hungry, and I still need to respect his wishes. She said, not too happily, that she would see what she could do. Before landing, we hit a long stretch of turbulence that prevented anyone in coach from moving freely in the aisles. From a distance, she threw me a bag of apple slices and a shrug. The slices weren't crisp, but grainy and wet. Still, I ate them all and saved the bag. Thank you.
Thank you, Weike, for taking us to China. I like that reclining one, but thank you very much. Cara, your turn.
Well, thank you so much to Ron and to AQR and to Heather for that wonderful introduction, and to Weike for that great reading. I've long been a fan of Weike's fiction, and so I'm really thrilled to be reading with her tonight. I'm going to be reading from a story called You Never Get It Back, which is a story of mine that appeared in AQR this summer. It's also the title story of my forthcoming short story collection, which is linked by character. And so the whole book follows this same character who we meet in this story, whose name is Kate. So I'm going to read starting at the beginning of the story, so there's really nothing that you need to know. I'll read about the first third of the story, and if you're curious about what happens from there, perhaps you can pick up a back issue of AQR and subscribe. Okay, so You Never Get It Back. A party was being had, and Kate agreed to go. The party would be held in Cambridge, a 5-hour bus ride away from southern Vermont, where she was working part-time in a lab and living with her mother this first year out of college to save money and think about what kind of future she might want. It was a New Year's Eve party. With the arrival of a new millennium came a legitimate, historic feeling reason to panic or celebrate, depending on one's inclination. The whole world was gearing up. Her old college roommate Esme called to invite her on December 30th, and because Kate was fighting with her boyfriend, with whom she had planned to spend New Year's Eve, she said yes, though not without hesitation. But Esme begged. She didn't want to go alone. She promised Kate that this party would be fun and cheap and attended by Harvard Law School students, including Esme's ex-boyfriend, Paul. Kate and Esme could crash at a studio in the densely populated Harvard-dominated neighborhood behind the law school if a better option failed to present itself. Both of us? Won't it be awkward, Kate asked, and Esme assured Kate that she and Paul had a friendly relationship and that each regarded the other with platonic affection but had moved on, going so far as to suggest perhaps, just maybe, if this other thing wasn't working out, Kate might be interested in him. No, Kate said, never going to happen. But Esme persisted, saying that Kate would like Paul. He had grown up in a single-parent household in a little town outside Albuquerque, lived in a trailer, was determined to rise from the lower middle class to the upper middle class. Some men in his position would want to be rich, Esme told her, but he's not greedy. He wants a nice life, that's all. Was Esme herself still interested in Paul? Kate couldn't tell. She made a non-committal noise. You're his type, Kate, Esme continued, smart brunette with a working class background. I was too blonde for him. He called me princess. He hated that I grew up in a bedroom with white carpet. Kate arrived at South Station from Vermont before Esme's Amtrak train came in from the posh town in rural northern New Jersey, where she had grown up. Esme was spending the winter holidays there with her parents, a VP at a pharmaceutical agency, and a real estate agent who were both now semi-retired. Esme considered them her best friends. In her mind, they led audacious, iconoclastic lives. In the 80s, when my father was a lowly bench chemist, she would say, my mother out-earned him. They liked to drink and throw catered parties. Kate towed her luggage from the bus station through the chill wind of the concrete-walled outdoor walkway to South Station's main building, which housed the train station. Waiting in the train station's warm, brightly lit food court, Kate ordered a pepperoni slice from Sbarro and ate the slice with a plastic knife and fork to make it last. An hour to spend here at least. But she had been the one to suggest she wait. Go along to Cambridge when you arrive, Esme had said. Paul will be happy to see you. Kate wished she had a cell phone. If the train was delayed, how would she know? She would have to ask the desk agent. The big clock by the black arrivals board read 2:07 p.m. Esme's train was due in at 3:05 p.m. She read a back issue of Structure until 2:55 p.m. and went to the platform to stretch her legs. Outside, the sky was already darkening. A light snowfall drifted down from the flat gray vault, the wind picking up the dry flakes on the platform and eddying the snow in small twists like a peel of lemon in a cocktail. The pale light had a muffled quality, as if strained through white gauze. Would the party be fun? She gave it a 50-50 chance. A small regret moved through her. She would prefer to be in New York with Michael, but he hadn't called, And what could she have done? Gotten the ski resort's address from his mother and shown up unannounced? No. And anything was better than sitting home on New Year's Eve, worried and humiliated and preparing to break up with him, unless he had a truly dazzling explanation for his behavior. 2 trains arrived on parallel tracks. Passengers disembarked into the cold air, stamping their feet and chafing their hands. Rumi, Esme's voice came from behind her. Esme liked to color this, as if to reinforce the source of their unlikely bond. Their junior year at Williams, they'd roomed together, matched up by the housing office, when Kate's freshman and sophomore year roommate transferred to Yale and Esme transferred in. Before going their separate ways senior year, Kate to a co-op and Esme to an off-campus apartment, they'd grown unexpectedly close. Kate listened to Esme's romantic worries and reassured her about her academic papers, which Esme gave to Kate to read, and after hearing her responses, relentlessly revised into perfection. Esme, in turn, took offense on Kate's behalf when she felt Kate had been slighted, and insisted Kate stand up for herself when a professor failed her on an exam when she was in the infirmary with strep throat. She helped Kate with money, too. She had bought Kate's second semester school books on her parents' credit card, knowing the book's expense was a hardship, and insisting her parents didn't mind when Kate tried to refuse what seemed too large a gift. And now, unlikely a pair though they were, they stood greeting each other in South Station on the cusp of a new millennium. Small and bird-boned, Esme struggled along the wet platform with an oversized Chanel duffel bag. She dropped the bag to embrace Kate. The 2 women let out a joint shriek of happiness, or a performance of happiness. And Esme said, "Hi, hi, hi, oh, you look great." As Kate said, "You're here." A businessman in his 40s trailed Esme. "Kate, this is Duncan," she said triumphantly, pulling away and turning to acknowledge him. "Duncan, my brilliant roommate, Kate." Esme collected men. She was good at it. "Nice to meet you," the man said. To Esme, "Where are you headed? I can give you a hand with that bag." The businessman walked them to the red line. He left the bag at the turnstiles, hoisting it over to Esme after she passed through the steel arms. "Can you get it? I can carry it to the platform if you'd like," he said, nodding toward the glass window behind which sat a tea official to indicate he could buy a token. "No need," Esme said, "but thank you." Kate dragged her own dingy roller bag, taking care not to dirty it further. The pink fabric showed all stain. The wheels were wet from slush. Snow clung to the bag, and as Esme took the man's card and made a general promise to call if she found a free minute for lunch while she was in town, Kate brushed away the white accumulation with her bare hand, the warmth melting the snow so the fabric grew damp, pink deepening to a dusky rose. Their first semester as roommates, the 2 had seen each other a little. Esme had spent many weekends away in New York City visiting Paul, who worked for a public policy think tank. He was 5 years older. Kate had never met him. He and Esme had split up that November because Esme had fallen for a lanky, wealthy member of the lacrosse team, though really Kate suspected the problem had been Esme's jealousy of Paul's ex-girlfriend, a model, and Paul's resistance to Esme's plans, which involved moving to Princeton and settling down into a life like her parents, in a community that seemed to demand one strive for more while pretending to think of oneself as a success. Kate was busy with schoolwork, trying to salvage a faltering attempt to double major in physics and chemistry, a choice she was beginning to doubt was a good one, though it had qualified her for several scholarships. But that spring, the 2 shared an English class. Kate enjoyed the short stories the professor assigned. She tended to sympathize with the women in these stories, and she tired of the boys in the class making comments like, "She's so self-pitying," about a girl dating a married man, even though the girl blamed only herself and was self-deprecatingly funny about her regrets. Or, "I'd be out of there," about a grieving wife mourning a stillborn baby and shaken by a carjacking, who began to suffer an extreme fear of break-ins. Or about the bullying, patronizing, passive-aggressive young American man in Hills Like White Elephants, a character even Hemingway didn't much seem to like, as he, the young man, pushed his girlfriend, Jig, into having an abortion. "He's being rational. He just wants a straight answer, but she's being so emotional about it." "What does she mean when she says you never get it back?" one went on. "She hasn't even lost anything." The professor, a new assistant professor about the age of the fictional grieving wife, smiled when the boys made these comments and left it to the girls in the class to take up the cudgel for empathy, for feminism. Esme was unafraid in this regard. Her good looks and intellectual confidence shielded her from the boys' dismissal or ridicule. She had recently been introduced to critical theory, too, and she liked to talk about homosocial triangles. And because no one knew what she meant, they were cowed into silence. This had interested Kate. Kate suspected that Esme regarded her with her scholarship and work-study job in the lab and what Esme might call her disadvantaged background as a charity case. But despite this, Kate felt an affection for her. Esme was smart and could be generous. Kate spent the first 2 months of the fall semester evading Esme's questions about her family, choosing not to disclose how much they'd struggled after her father left. But when her mother called one night, worried about money and in fact sounding suicidal, and Esme overheard the conversation and the subsequent call to Kate's aunt, the plea for intervention, she was tactful and compassionate. The fact that she regarded Kate as exotic held an appealing innocence. Riding the T to Harvard Square, Esme told Kate about graduate school. She was studying English at Stanford, a decision over which she had agonized. Accepted at all the top schools, she'd gone into a tailspin and called Kate crying, barely able to choke out, "Harvard and Yale are both so good, but the theorist I most want to work with is Terry Castle." Kate had been torn between sympathy and distaste. Esme was so afraid, beneath her confidence, of failing. Once at Stanford, she asked to be assigned to the medical school dorm so she could meet a doctor. She reported without irony that her mother's advice was to sit on the medical school steps reading a book, but the dorms are better, she'd said, more casual, more points of contact. Kate thought Esme should go to business school. Forget teaching, her mind was tuned to strategy. She would perhaps be best suited to running the free world. I talked to my advisor last week, and he thinks I should learn German and write my dissertation on this one medieval dramatist named Roswitha. I could focus on how her plays relate to our gendered conception of innocence, using Eve Sedgwick as a lens text. Do you want to learn German? Esme had begun as a Henry James scholar. Her true fondness was for romantic stories of American girls abroad. Esme shrugged. Sure, my advisor says it's my best chance of being competitive for jobs. What happened to James? He's overdone. Kate knew little about PhDs in the humanities and the academic job market. Still, it struck her as silly to focus on an area in which you weren't all that interested if you were going to study the topic for 5 or more years and go on to teach it. About Esme, Michael had remarked, she learns things to have information to lord over you in conversation, not because she actually wants to know. He was an economics major in his senior year at Cornell and planned to work in finance. He believed that money was power, and that was what he wanted. His view of the world was unduly cynical, Esme frequently remarked to Kate, but too often he was proven right. How is UMass? Esme asked. Kate worked 20 hours a week in a lab on campus, researching DNA, or rather as a technician in support of the postdocs and the scientists who did the research. Her increased work-study hours and flagging grades had forced her to drop the chemistry major in her senior year, minoring instead. So after graduating with her physics degree, she'd sought research experience. It was an hour drive and she shared the car with her mother, so she scheduled herself for the longest days possible. Her job was to help carry out crystallographic analysis by cleaning and prepping equipment, tedious but necessary tasks. She was saving for a deposit on an apartment and applying to full-time jobs in Boston and New York. You know, fine, the work is a little rote, but it's going to be until I get an advanced degree. It's good to be around these scientists and see how they got where they are and what they like and don't like about the job. And Michael, what a shit. I know, but maybe he has a good reason. There is no reason good enough. Kate knew Esme was right. Things with Michael were complicated, though. He made her laugh, and he was genuine and angry in a way she liked. Why anger drew her, she didn't know. Esme located men she could control. Kate chose men she could not. Perhaps it had to do, she speculated, with Esme's love of constructing a good story, as opposed to her own curiosity about the results of an experiment. By the time they arrived at Paul's building, darkness had fallen. The wind gusted. Kate could swear the temperatures had dropped 10 degrees in the 15 minutes between when they emerged from underground at the Harvard Square station and now. A winter storm advisory was in effect. Esme said they were lucky to have made it to Paul's before the snow began in earnest. She pressed his buzzer, holding it an extra second as Kate shivered. The wind whipped her hair into her mouth. Her nose ran. They waited. Esme pressed the buzzer a second time, and a loud buzz issued forth. The door lock clicked open. The women climbed a narrow, dim flight of stairs, bags bumping behind them as a man Kate assumed was Paul opened a door 5 flights above and waited in the doorway. Sorry, he called down. I don't have my keys, and it'll lock behind me. That's fine, Esme called up, giving a brittle laugh that said it obviously wasn't. Kate paused on the second-story landing, rearranged her grip on the bag. Esme stopped behind her. My duffel isn't too heavy, Esme called, but Kate has an actual suitcase. Do you want to find your keys? Of course, he said. Hold on a sec. Esme set her bag on the landing and waited for Paul. He retrieved his keys and bounded down the stairs. He hugged Esme, who responded with tepid enthusiasm, until he lifted her in the air, at which point she relented and seemed pleased by the flattering attention. After lowering her, he shook Kate's hand. His grasp was warm. Now disarrayed, his longish brown hair fell across his forehead. She took in his undeniable good looks, pleasantly crooked nose that might once have been broken, a mouth that suggested good humor and intelligence. When he smiled at her, she wanted to smile back. Here, he said, I'll get these. And he lifted the 2 bags and carried them up the remaining 3 flights of stairs in that effortless way that surprised Kate, even though she knew to expect it from men. They were stronger. And yet it was hard to look at her bag and see a thing that could be easy to lift. It necessitated looking at a suitcase and seeing in its place a lighter object, a pillow, a microscope, a slide. She envied that ability to act on the world. Paul wore gray sweatpants and a t-shirt, and she could see Esme examining this choice critically. Esme liked her men well dressed. For a holiday, she gave them clothes she wanted them to wear, and then complimented them encouragingly for wearing the sweaters and button-downs, soliciting other people's approval. Don't you think Marcus looks handsome in this shirt? She would ask friends, or doesn't this lilac make Jake's eyes look so blue? And what could one say but yes? The men Esme dated usually seemed to expect this and were happy to humor her. The ones who resisted didn't last long. Such agency to shape a person to your will and to refuse them if they did not yield. Paul had refused to yield. The studio was small but neat. Paul put their bags by a faded maroon futon couch. A television opposite the couch provided a focal point. Beside it stood a small bookshelf with legal books. Adjacent to the kitchen, a desk was wedged in the dining nook, where a kitchen table should go, a green-shaded lamp emitting soft light. Paul went to get them drinks. Beer or wine, he asked the women. I haven't been properly domesticated, he added, nodding to the desk. I eat on the couch if I eat here, which is rare, but please note, I did clean up for you two. Esme wandered toward the kitchen, where Paul stood uncorking a bottle of wine, and peeked through the open door to the bedroom. Kate joined her, hanging back a little. The studio was not a true studio. In fact, it was 2 rooms, though the bedroom was closet-sized. Clean sheets, he said. Look, there's even a decorative pillow. The futon's murder. I'll take it. Or we can all sleep in the bed. At this, Esme turned to him and said, someone's getting ahead of himself. Paul laughed an easy, perhaps flirtatious laugh. Baby doll, he said, since you broke my heart, I haven't even allowed myself to dream of you. You ruined me, you know, gutted me like a fish. Please, she said. She's a heartbreaker, this one, he called to Kate. Emerging from the kitchen area with 2 glasses of red wine, he distributed to the women. He smiled and announced, I'm gonna hop in the shower. The day got away from me. I thought we'd grab a bite to eat before the party. There's a great cheap place around the corner. You two like Middle Eastern? Mollified by the flirtation, Esme said yes. Kate was relieved. Cheap was good. Each week she saved as much of her small paycheck as she could, so she might afford a deposit on an apartment. But most of the money went to cover her portion of the telephone bill and bus fare to see Michael, and to her mother, who insisted Kate didn't have to pay rent, but who appreciated the help. Her disability check only went so far, and after the second month without enough heat, Kate started chipping in, even though her mother protested. They both knew it was the only reasonable option. Esme enjoyed nice restaurants and tended to suggest expensive places. Worries about money she met with, "This is the one time we're here," or "We work hard, we deserve this," or "In 5 years, whatever we spend on this meal is going to seem like such a pitifully small amount of money," which Kate sincerely hoped was true. I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Okay, so to hear the rest of the story, we've got to get your book, which is coming out soon. That's the good news. Or a back issue of AQR that Ron's going to start throwing out the window there in Anchorage and hope it gets our direction, right? Thank you both so much. And I'm glad, I think we have a little time to chat. And it came through a little in these pieces and in other stories of yours that I've both read, but I'm hoping that if you want to, and you don't have to, but you could talk to each other about humor and also enlighten us on when to use it, how to use it, where it fits in your work, because you're both very funny in your writing, and I know that that's hard to do. So feel free to chit chat about that if you'd like.
Yeah, sure. So I think humor is, it's actually really hard to teach. Students are always like, how do I be funny on the page? It really has to be natural. There's certain ways that humor will work on a page that doesn't work in actual speech. Some people are really funny in real life, but not so funny on the page, and like vice versa. So sometimes with jokes and with humor, it's a lot of cutting, I think, a lot of cutting and strange juxtapositions of things to make things funnier, or to make weird characterizations kind of stand out a little bit.
Yeah, I think, one of the challenges with humor is to write a kind of humor that isn't too broad. That's one of the traps a writer might fall into. And Weike, I really admire that about your fiction. It's very funny in a sort of subtle, wry kind of way that I always totally believe in. Yeah,
thank you. I mean, likewise for you. I think you're really good. You're really good at being funny in dialogue. I find that actually incredibly hard. Do you run the dialogue lines yourself, or how do you, because they're like, Michael's shit. I was like, oh, it's pretty good. It's just like has this liveliness and kind of funniness to it.
Yeah, I think, what you said about cutting is so crucial. I often will, I always felt like I was really bad at dialogue, actually. And so that's so nice to hear.
Yeah.
When I started, I challenged myself to write a whole story that was mostly dialogue to try to teach myself how to get better.
Wow.
So that story's in the book. It appeared in Granta a couple of years ago. It's called The Most Common State of Matter, and it's almost all conversation. But I did a lot of listening in on conversations and jotting down actual dialogue from real life, which if transcribed on the page, as you said, right, like it often, that act of transcription can lose something. So you have to cut and shape. But I find it really pleasurable to think about worldview, contrast. And for me, that's often in part where the humor comes from.
Right, contrast, like one thing, it's kind of like two things are the same and the third is not, right? And then that brings in a little bit of humor to the situation. Sometimes the situation is just funny, you kind of put your characters in really uncomfortable situations and you just see what happens to them. Kind of awkwardness can be funny, or just like the delivery of a line can be funny, but it's like with all writing, it is a lot of editing and self-doubt.
I had a question for you. So what about that line, that's so close, but, between, funny and sad? I mean, even Michael is a shit, that's really, I'm feeling really bad for Kate at that moment. And the it's not like ha funny, but the kind of the now that you've explained it, Weike, the way that you cut to different scenes in your story, there's some humor in just the transition, but it's so close to like, do you cry or do you laugh? You know, you're not sure. And how do you navigate that? Those sort of that line between what's funny and what isn't.
I think context sometimes, like, right, anything can be funny, you know, stand-up comics are always saying anything can be funny, but with the right context and the right person saying it, that is true, right? Not everything can be funny in a different context or whatnot. So I think it's understanding maybe what the situation is, the character, how I don't know, Joan might react or another character reacts. Yeah, but Cara, you know, how do you think about that as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great question. I'm thinking now about how I saw a list of sort of cognitive defenses that people employ, and humor was one of the things on the list, which makes sense because, you know, I think that line that you mentioned, Heather, it's funny in part because Kate has been, you know, sort of defending Michael and just allowing for the possibility that maybe that there'll be some explanation, even though she knows really there is a plausible explanation. And when Esme just very directly renders this judgment, there's a kind of pleasure and surprise in it because all of these other sorts of defenses have been cut through, but it's its own sort of defense, right? It's the humor is also a kind of defense. So I think that's such an interesting idea. And then of course, later in the story, you come to know Michael a little better, and then you feel like the real heartbreak because both of those defenses have been left aside, or I hope readers do at least. I think too about, I read this great sort of description of how character works recently, which was sort of not about fiction, but a bit about real life, which was saying with people, often the thing that's like most great, you know, pleasurable or wonderful or great about them, the flip side of it is the thing that like drives you a little crazy about them. And make the mistake sometimes of thinking you can sort of cut a person in half and have the good part and somehow the bad part could be left aside. And if only they would just lop off that bad part, if you right, they'd be perfect without understanding, oh, it's actually all of a piece, but just viewed from a slightly different angle, put in a slightly different situation. And to me, that's humor and sadness too, a little bit.
Yeah, it's true.
It's also, I think maybe it's a way to get to a kind of empathy. Also, because like you said, it cuts away some of the, some of the things that would ordinarily put you off, which would be the really sad piece, would really put you off. And then what happens is you are able to see something without being repulsed, and it draws you in, and the absurdities of it are applicable to everyone. So there's a humanity that comes through the humor, and in both of your work, that's like really true and really important, I think.
Yeah.
Ron, as all of you, I think, are, well, I know Ron and Cara's been an editor, and Weike's a teacher and has worked with a bunch of editors I know, probably edited some sort of anthologies, where you're going to be asked to edit a lot. But you know, when you're picking stories, do you look for humor? I mean, is that something that you try to balance out a journal like you know, Southern Review or AQR, when you're putting together a piece, not to have so many weighty ones, or not?
Definitely for me, when I was editing the Southern Review, that was something that I looked for. And a lot of my favorite writers, even writers I hadn't thought of in the past, is funny, when I went back to reread them to think about what my values were as a fiction writer and as an editor, I found there was often a sort of wry or subtle sense of humor. It's not 100% true, but it's often true. And I think it's just a kind of pleasure that you give the reader. I think it requires actually like a lot of intelligence and skill to make it happen on the page. So it was definitely there in the fiction I was drawn to. Ron and Weike, what about you two?
I haven't edited like a lit journal, so I wouldn't know, but I think humor makes a lot of things much more bearable. Like if you think about things that you enjoy, there's humor, there's intellect, there's sadness, there's not flinching. I think I don't like it when writers kind of back away from a really hard topic. Humor allows you to get to the core quicker sometimes, and with more enjoyment. So I look for that. I don't, with student works, I try to find students who, I think students that start writing and they don't take themselves too seriously at the very beginning as like writers with a capital W, they're fun to work with. And then they kind of naturally find their voice that can be sort of funny. I think I benefited from, when I was studying with Amy Hempel, that she didn't really pressure me into having to write something so groundbreaking. It was just have fun on the page and play with your words a little bit. And that really was encouraging for humor for me at the beginning, that it was okay. I didn't have to write about, I don't know, like war, right? To really get something out that was important.
Yeah, Amy is very funny too.
It is very funny.
But the reality is, I think that you don't really look for humor. I mean, it's not like putting together a comedy collection, but more like real life has comedy and tragedy inherent to it. And depending on what you get, the editorial question is, I don't think we're really looking for the funny issue unless, there's some kind of theme like the funny issue. And we've actually published some very raw pieces. Mm-hmm. We're not at AQR, we're not afraid to take on both in any, well, not both, but in any of the genres, really raw pieces. We know they're not going to be crowd pleasers because of it. There's no place to hide. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, humor is a great way to open the tent. Mm-hmm. It is the way to get people inside. It is a very, very strong way for people to empathize, because once they are feeling a little bit more comfortable, they see the absurdities, they sometimes connect more to their own lives that way. So, obviously what I'm saying is some of the funny stories are really, really good because they really do a lot. And the humor does a lot of the heavy lifting. But it isn't something that I look for as, a requirement. This must be funny.
Well, we've gone about a few minutes over our allotted hour, and I don't want to take up any more of your valuable time. And thank you very, very much. And this will be available, of course, on the Alaska Quarterly Review YouTube channel, so anybody can watch it anytime and share it with your students or friends. And I'm really glad that you brought up Amy Hempel, because Amy, I think this is right, Ron. Amy Hempel and Stuart Dieback started this series. They were the first two.
That's right. They were the pair together.
Yeah, we came full circle. They were a year ago, so that's pretty cool.
She's like a wonderful.
They're both contributing editors to AQR.
Yeah, she's like a wonderful person. Yeah, and she taught me so much, without knowing it. I think I didn't know I was being taught stuff in her class. It just kind of naturally happened, which is the best.
And she was fun to talk to and hear how, and she has the way that she juxtaposes things that you're like, is this funny or weird or what? And, love it. But too, I also want to remind everybody that, both Weike and Cara have books coming out here, December and January, right?
Yeah.
And the best way to support them is to buy the books. That's how you can support writers and writing like this. And also I would encourage you, if possible, to buy them from an independent bookseller who lives near you, so that your neighborhood or community bookstore can also benefit. It all kind of goes around. And if, maybe if you're more like Kate, get it at the library. I'm sure both of these books will be at the library, and patronize your local library, because that's another really important place to us all as writers and readers. So again, thank you for joining us today for AQR's 2021-2022, the first in our literary series. And so on behalf of the Center for the Narrative and Lyric Arts, all our gratitude. for the generosity of today's writers, Weike and Cara, and to Cody Carver, who's behind the curtain at the Anchorage Museum
Right.
at the Rasmussen Center, who produces this program.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
also, as Ron would want me to make sure I remind you, and really it's important all the way around, please consider making a donation to AQR so that we can continue to bring you the work of writers like you heard today. Their voices are more important now than ever. So
Yeah, and then next week, 2 weeks from now, we have another great pairing. We have our contributing editor Patty Ann Rogers, 14 books of poetry. She's marvelous. And Laura Colby, who has her debut poetry book coming out just this month. And she's a physician in New York City. So it'll be a great event. And thank you, Weike and Cara.
Thank you.
thank you very much. I'm looking forward to your books, and
I'm
thanks for being
excited.
so generous.
Yeah, of course.
Take care of yourselves and somebody else if you can. So thank you.